The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, unrelenting rhythm that drummed against the roof of the small cabin, bouncing off the leaves and mud outside, echoing in the lonely spaces of the forest. Each drop felt like it was pressing down on the world, a reminder of the storm's intensity, of the forces beyond control that could change everything in an instant. Emma Chen gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white, her body shivering even through the warmth of the car heater. She had been running errands, handling the final preparations for a presentation that could make or break her company's next quarter, and the night had already been long. But somewhere along the way, her confidence had cracked. A careless word from a colleague, a missed cue from a board member, and she had stormed out of the office, her umbrella forgotten, her carefully planned evening ruined. Now, driving along the winding, isolated road, she felt the full weight of her own vulnerability. The wind whipped against the car, making the vehicle sway slightly, and rain streaked down the windshield in heavy sheets. She blinked hard, trying to see through the blur, the lights ahead of her cutting faintly through the gray haze. And then she saw it. A small cabin, half hidden behind the trees, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. It was rustic, simple, almost as if it had been waiting for her arrival, an island of potential safety amid the chaos. She pulled over, her heart hammering, and jumped out into the rain. The water soaked through her clothes almost immediately, dripping down her face and into her hair, chilling her to the bone. She ran to the door, knocking frantically, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Hello? Please, anyone?" Her voice croaked as fear and exhaustion clung to her words. The door opened slowly, revealing Marcus Winters. He was everything she remembered from the office, calm, composed, a presence that seemed unshakable. But now, standing in the dim light of the cabin, he appeared more than a colleague or an acquaintance. He was a guardian, someone whose mere presence made the storm outside seem less frightening. "Emma." His voice was steady, deep, but there was a sharp edge of concern in his eyes as he took in her soaked appearance. "You shouldn't be out here in this storm." She tried to smile, but the effort faltered. I didn't have anywhere else," she admitted, her voice small, vulnerable. She shivered, hugging herself as the wet fabric clung to her. Pride, which had always defined her, felt useless now. She was exposed, not as a CEO, not as a professional, but simply as a human being, trembling in the cold. Marcus's expression softened, but only slightly. He stepped aside without a word, allowing her to enter. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, faintly sweet, mixed with the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil that had seeped in through the open door. It was comforting, grounding. She sank into a chair near the fireplace, wrapping her arms around herself as her teeth chattered. "Sit closer to the fire," he said gently, breaking the silence. "You need to warm up." I don't want to be a burden," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind thrumming against the walls. "You're not a burden," he replied firmly, moving toward a stock of wood. "Tonight, you need help. I won't let you face the storm alone." Her pride flared briefly. In the office, she was decisive, commanding, in control. She had never needed help, certainly not from someone she worked with. And yet, she realized that her pride meant nothing in the face of the storm, in the face of raw human vulnerability. She swallowed hard and nodded, a silent admission that she had no choice but to accept his aid. Hours passed in near silence. Marcus moved quietly around the cabin, stocking wood, tending the fire, checking that she was warm, while Emma sat wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the flames dance and flicker. The storm outside beat relentlessly against the windows, but inside there was a fragile sense of calm. Every now and then, Marcus would glance at her, his eyes scanning her with quiet attentiveness, ensuring she was okay without making her feel uncomfortable. Her mind wandered, tracing back to every moment that had led her here. The confrontation in the boardroom, the long hours of preparation, the endless pressure to perform. And now, all of it seemed trivial compared to the human connection she was experiencing. For the first time in years, she realized that titles and accomplishments could not protect her from fear or loneliness. What mattered now was something simpler, something purer: trust, care, and the unspoken promise of safety. At one point, unable to hold back the question any longer, she asked softly, almost hesitantly, "Marcus, why are you doing this?" He paused, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in the dark. I know what it's like to need help and have no one there. I can't leave you out there tonight. You wouldn't forgive me if I did." Her throat tightened, and she realized her tears had been forming without her noticing. She blinked them back, embarrassed but also deeply moved. No one had ever shown her such care without expectation, without judgment. She had been admired, respected, even envied, but rarely loved or protected in such a simple, human way. The night stretched on. She watched him quietly, observing the subtle motions of a man accustomed to responsibility, to sacrifice, to putting others before himself. His movements were careful, practiced, unhurried yet deliberate. It was a kind of quiet strength she had never fully understood until now. Eventually, exhaustion took over. She curled up under the blanket, staring into the flames, allowing herself to finally rest. For the first time, she felt safe, not because the storm had ceased, but because she had discovered something she hadn't realized she was missing: human kindness. It was not flashy or performative. It was quiet, patient, and unyielding. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, and in that existence, it held her. Marcus watched her sleep for a long time, careful not to disturb her. He understood in a way that few ever would, that moments like this, moments of pure vulnerability, were sacred. Life had been hard on him, teaching him lessons of endurance and survival, but it also gave him the clarity to know that sometimes the right thing to do was simply to care. And in the warmth of that small, storm-battered cabin, two people, strangers in some ways, and yet deeply human, shared a connection that could not be quantified by office politics, money, or status. It was quiet. It was fragile, but it was real. Hours slipped by unnoticed as the storm began to wane. The fire crackled softly, the rain softened, and Emma slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like an eternity. And though neither of them spoke, each understood something fundamental. That night had changed them both, had stripped away pretension and pride, leaving only the raw, enduring truth of human compassion. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm itself had spent all its energy overnight and left behind only a soft, pale light that filtered through the rain-streaked windows. Emma stirred slowly, the blanket wrapped around her like a protective cocoon. Her body ached from the cold and damp, from the tension she'd carried all night. But underneath that discomfort, a strange warmth lingered. The warmth of survival, of care, of human kindness she had never expected to experience. She blinked a few times, trying to shake off the fog of sleep, the memory of the night before slowly settling into clarity. The fire had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft golden light across the cabin. Marcus was already moving about, preparing a simple breakfast, his movements calm, steady, almost ritualistic. There was a quiet dignity in the way he handled everything, a practiced precision that spoke of years of responsibility and self-reliance. He had made the cabin feel like a sanctuary last night, and now, in the soft morning light, it felt like a home created by care, by patience, and by a quiet sense of duty. Emma's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. She wanted to speak, to break the silence with words of thanks, but for a long moment, she simply watched. There was something almost sacred in the way Marcus moved, chopping wood, tending the small stove, setting a pot of water to boil. Each action was deliberate, careful, and completely unselfish. Finally, she spoke, her voice tentative, barely above a whisper. "Marcus, thank you." He glanced at her briefly, a faint, almost shy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "For what?" "For last night," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For everything. Letting me in, keeping me safe, the blanket, the fire. You didn't have to do any of that." He shook his head, a small sigh escaping him. "I didn't. I just couldn't leave you out there. It wasn't safe, and someone would have done the same for me if I were in your position." She felt her throat tighten, a lump forming that made it hard to speak. The weight of what he had done for her, protecting her without expectation, giving her dignity when she had felt utterly exposed, was almost overwhelming. No one had ever treated her like this before. She had been admired, respected, even feared in the corporate world, but never seen, truly seen, as a human in need of compassion. She tried to smile, but it faltered. I've never experienced anything like that. It meant more than I can say." Marcus nodded, as if acknowledging her words without needing them to be grand or dramatic. "Sometimes that's all anyone can do," he said quietly. "Just help when it's needed, quietly, without expecting recognition or thanks." The simplicity of that statement struck her. In the office, she had spent years maneuvering, negotiating, and performing. Success was always measured in outcomes, profits, and accolades. But here, in the small cabin with the sun filtering through the trees and rain-soaked berth outside, she realized that the true measure of strength wasn't in control or status. It was in care, in humanity, in the quiet willingness to do right by another person. Breakfast was humble. A pot of oatmeal, bread toasted over the fire, and steaming cups of coffee, but it felt luxurious in its simplicity. They ate slowly, neither rushing, both aware of the unspoken bond that had formed between them. Marcus's son peeked from the bedroom, rubbing his eyes and yawning, and Emma's heart softened at the sight. She realized that the man who had cared for her so selflessly all night was also shaping another human life with the same patience and quiet strength. For a long time, neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. The air was thick with understanding, a silent acknowledgement of what passed and what had been learned. Emma thought about her life, her career, her achievements, her relentless pursuit of success, and realized how hollow some of it had felt compared to this simple, raw connection. She had always measured herself by what she could accomplish alone, but this was something entirely different. Finally, as the morning wore on, she gathered the courage to speak again. "Marcus, I don't know how to repay you for last night," she admitted, her voice small, almost hesitant. He shook his head, looking down at the steaming coffee cup in his hands. "You don't need to repay me," he said softly. "You just remember that sometimes helping someone, giving them care when they need it, doesn't cost anything but your time and your humanity. That's enough." Her eyes filled with tears she barely noticed, tears not of shame or vulnerability, but of deep, overwhelming gratitude. It was a gift she had never expected, a gift of being seen, being cared for, being treated as a human first, not a boss, not a CEO, not a title. She realized that her pride had been a barrier for years, keeping her from experiencing this kind of connection. And now that barrier was gently, irrevocably broken. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, dripping with sunlight and promise. The forest around the cabin glistened with the residue of rain, the scent of wet earth and pine filling the air. Emma felt lighter somehow, as if the night's events had cleared more than just her immediate danger. They had cleared a space in her heart, a space for empathy, trust, and understanding that had been long neglected. When it was time for her to leave, she paused at the door. She had packed her briefcase, straightened her damp clothes as best as she could, but there was a hesitation in her movement. She turned to Marcus, searching for words, searching for a way to convey the depth of her gratitude. I just want you to know," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "that what you did, it changed me. Not just last night, but it made me realize what really matters." He looked at her for a long moment, his face calm, expression unreadable, yet his eyes softened ever so slightly. "Then maybe it wasn't just for you," he said quietly. "Maybe it was for both of us." Emma's lips curved a small, genuine smile. She felt a swell of emotion she couldn't name, relief, gratitude, and admiration, and something else, a warmth that spread through her chest and lingered even as she stepped into the fresh morning air. The forest sparkled in the gentle sunlight, the storm now a memory, and she knew that she would carry the lessons of that night with her forever. That night, Marcus had shown her something she had never truly understood before, that the simplest acts of humanity, the quiet, selfless gestures could leave a lasting impact, shaping lives in ways far beyond immediate recognition. She walked down the path to her car, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot grounding her, and realized that she had been given more than safety. She had been given a glimpse of the power of human kindness, a reminder that even in moments of fear and vulnerability, connection and care could prevail. And as she drove back toward the city, leaving the cabin in the forest behind, she silently vowed to herself that she would never forget. Not the storm, not the fear, not even the vulnerability, but most of all, she would never forget Marcus Winters and the quiet, unwavering kindness that had
The
changed
days
her
that followed
forever.
passed in a strange rhythm for Emma Chen. The city's relentless pace had resumed. Emails, meetings, boardroom decisions. But somehow, everything felt slightly altered. The memory of the storm, the cabin, and Marcus Winters lingered in her mind, like an echo of something profoundly human she had almost forgotten existed. She found herself pausing during her day, thinking not about deadlines or profits, but about warmth, care, and the quiet courage of someone who had acted selflessly when it mattered most. At first, she had doubted herself. Could she really carry this experience into her everyday life without it feeling out of place? After all, the office was a world of logic, strategy, and performance. Vulnerability was rarely rewarded. Yet the memory of Marcus's quiet, steady presence, his patient care, his calm reassurance, was a reminder that real strength often came in the form of compassion. And she realized with a mix of humility and awe, that strength had nothing to do with power or status. Weeks went by. Emma's life returned to its usual rhythm, but she couldn't ignore the lessons that had been seared into her heart. She found herself noticing small acts of kindness around her. The barista who remembered her coffee order, the janitor who always offered a kind word, a colleague quietly helping another without seeking recognition. Each act reminded her of the night in the cabin, of Marcus and the selflessness he had shown. One evening, she found herself once again driving out to the outskirts of town. This time, it wasn't the storm or desperation that compelled her, but something gentler, gratitude. She carried a small gift, carefully chosen, a token of thanks that felt wholly inadequate compared to the magnitude of what Marcus had done. Still, she hoped it might convey a fraction of the appreciation she felt, a gesture of recognition for the humanity he had extended to her. When she arrived at the cabin, the soft glow of lights spilling from the windows welcomed her like a warm embrace. She knocked lightly, unsure if she should announce herself, if she might intrude on their privacy. The door opened and Marcus stood there, casual yet alert, as though sensing even before she spoke the purpose of her visit. Behind him, a small face peeked out, a boy with shy eyes, curious and cautious, yet immediately aware of her presence. Emma smiled warmly, crouching slightly to meet the child's gaze. "Hi there," she said gently. "I'm Emma. You must be Marcus's son." The boy nodded, a small tentative smile forming. There was something in the quiet attentiveness of his eyes that reminded her of Marcus himself, steady, thoughtful, careful. She realized that the man who had protected her, who had shown such unwavering kindness, was shaping another life in the same way. The realization filled her chest with a tender awe. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his son's shoulder. "Emma, it's good to see you," he said. "Come inside." The cabin smelled faintly of cooking and wood smoke, comforting and familiar. Emma felt a wave of warmth wash over her. Last night, or rather the stormy night she had fled from, felt like a distant memory, yet its lessons remained vivid. She handed Marcus the small gift, her hands trembling slightly. I just wanted to thank you again for everything. I know a small gift can't even begin to, but I wanted you to know it mattered. What you did, it changed me. It made me see something I'd been ignoring for years." Marcus took the gift reluctantly, his expression unreadable, but there was a faint softness in his eyes. "You don't need to do this," he said quietly. "You've already shown gratitude just by remembering what matters." Emma shook her head, laughter escaping softly. "No, I want you to know that you taught me something important, that helping someone without expectation, that's real strength. And I won't forget it." Marcus nodded, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a genuine, unguarded smile. "Then maybe it wasn't just for you," he said, voice quiet but warm. "Maybe it was for both of us." The boy, sensing the weight of their conversation, even if he didn't understand it fully, wandered over with cautious curiosity. Emma knelt to meet his eye level, smiling gently. "You're lucky to have him," she said softly. "He's a good man." The small boy smiled shyly, tugging at his father's hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Marcus's hand enveloped his son's, a protective yet gentle grasp. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. The sight reminded her that the acts of kindness we give, whether to strangers or loved ones, resonate far beyond the immediate moment. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. They sat together, quietly talking, laughing softly, sharing stories of life outside the office, outside the storm, outside the rigid rules of the corporate world. Emma realized something profound. Vulnerability, kindness, and connection were not weaknesses. They were the most human, most courageous expressions of strength. The cabin, small and modest, became a place where walls could fall, where fears could be voiced, where trust could grow. As the evening wore on, Emma realized she didn't want to leave just yet. She felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected, a sense that even the smallest gestures, care, attention, patience, could create bonds deeper than she had ever known. For the first time, she understood that life was not about control or image or achievements alone. It was about presence, empathy, and the quiet courage to act in the service of another person. Eventually, it was time to go. Emma stood at the door, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment in a way that words could not capture. She turned to Marcus, her voice barely a whisper. "I taught you something I'll carry for the rest of my life, that even in the darkest storms, warmth, compassion, and care can prevail, that even when we're afraid, we can still choose to be human." Marcus nodded, his eyes steady, a quiet pride shining through. "It's the only strength that matters." Emma smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, and stepped out into the night. The world outside was quiet, washed clean by the storm that had passed days ago, but she carried inside her the warmth of what she had learned, the hope of what she had experienced, and the unshakable belief that the simplest, kindest gestures could change lives in ways nothing else could. As she walked down the path towards her car, she realized something she hadn't understood before. Humanity, real, unguarded humanity, was a gift. It demanded nothing in return, yet it left a mark that could never be erased. And for the first time, she felt not just grateful, but transformed. In that quiet moment, under the pale light of the moon reflecting off the damp earth, she made a silent vow to never forget the night, the storm, the cabin, and the man who had shown her the true selfless strength. She would carry that lesson forward, into the boardrooms, into her life, into the world, knowing that even in the coldest moments, warmth and compassion could prevail. And as she drove back towards the city, the cabin and the forest fading behind her, she smiled, knowing that some lessons, hard-earned, quiet, and profoundly human, would stay with her forever, guiding her in ways she never imagined.